And so joining us to help guide you through your back-to-school questions and concerns is infectious disease specialist Dr. Susy Hota and epidemiologist Raywat Deonandan. So let's get right into it. Dr. Hota, let's start with this question we got from Elise. She's a grade 1 student in Toronto.
Hi, my name's Elise. I was wondering what to do with your mask at recess.
The mask at recess.
Yeah, great question from Elise. So, if you're going outside for recess and you think you can keep more than 2 meters of distance between yourself and your friends, you can take off your mask. If you don't think you can keep that distance, you should probably keep your mask on. And I would suggest that you have a little plastic or paper bag that you can slip your mask into and put into your pocket, or maybe carry a purse or have a fanny pack that you can put it into so that you can easily get it again when you need to go back into the building.
Okay, good answer. Raywat, even lunchtime obviously isn't immune from the pandemic. A lot of families have been wondering about how to pack lunches for their kids. Let's have a listen.
My children's school has recommended against the use of reusable lunch kits and containers as part of their COVID safety plan. My question is, do the infectious disease experts think this is necessary or effective in reducing the spread of COVID-19?
Interesting question. So there are 3 main ways we think this disease is transmitted. First is via respiratory droplets. That's when fluid from your lungs is transmitted by talking or breathing on somebody else. And the second is via aerosol transmission. That's when smaller particles float about in the air for longer periods of time. And the third is probably fomite or surface transmission. That's when one person touches a surface and somebody else touches the same surface and gets infected that way. So when they're banning things like reusable lunch kits, they're trying to minimize fomite or surface transmission. The thing is, that's not really a big way that this disease is transmitted. So I think it's probably not needed. It probably helps a tiny bit, but not a lot.
I find that answer so interesting because in the beginning of the pandemic, we were all so focused on touch. I guess the evolution of this is kind of fascinating. Dr. Hota,
100%.
A lot of younger kids also have some tough questions about going back to school, obviously, during this pandemic. Here's another one.
I want to know when COVID will end, and will I be able to hug friends when I go back to school?
Oh, goodness. One. Yeah, that breaks the heart, doesn't it? I mean, it's such an important part of the social interaction of kids. And, unfortunately, I wish I could say when this will end and you can actually be the way that things were before. But I think what we're waiting for is development of an effective vaccine and having it out there for people to be available to people, and really good uptake of that vaccine before we can really think about lifting some of the restrictions. I suspect that might be a couple of years away even. So, that's sort of what I'm positioning in my head. So unfortunately, not anytime soon, in my opinion.
And to his other question about, can we have friends when we go back to school? I mean, absolutely. Raywat, there's a lot of talk about how extracurriculars can continue safely, and one of those concerns comes from a question from a student who simply asking, are school sports safe?
Well, it's a complicated question and a complicated answer. It depends on the sport and where it's played and how it's played. In general, you don't want to be face-to-face with someone who's breathing on you for long periods of time, and you'd rather be outdoors than indoors. So wrestling, for example, probably not a good idea. Tennis is probably okay, you're at a distance. Other kinds of sports like soccer, you can probably do safely if you're outside. But if you can follow the rule of not being close to someone for a long period of time, it's probably doable. But that's a small list of sports, really.
Yeah. Dr. Hota, sports obviously not the only extracurricular activities students participate in. Here's a question from Amber in Sudbury, Ontario.
What will happen with the music instruments, specifically the woodwinds and the brass ones, where you have to blow into them to create music?
Yeah, this is really interesting. I think you have to kind of think about what we know so far about COVID-19 transmission with different musical instruments, and especially these woodwind and brass instruments, the horns. What we've seen so far is experimental evidence that aerosols can be generated when you blow into those instruments. We also know that those instruments can get contaminated on the outside or on the mouthpiece with bacteria and fungi. And even the virus that causes COVID-19 can last on stainless steel and copper to a lesser extent, but for hours to days. But what we haven't really seen is evidence of transmission from person to person related to playing instruments, or outbreaks related to people playing instruments together. Doesn't mean it can't happen, but we just haven't really seen that demonstrated yet. So putting that all together, what I would say is a prudent way of going forward is to, as much as possible, keep those instruments dedicated to individual kids through a term, and make sure that they're wiped down and cleaned in between uses, so by end of day.
Okay, excellent. And Raywat, there are lots of concerns about how the virus could spread, inside the classroom. So here's a question from a parent who asks, my daughter's school is composed of windowless classrooms. Would portable air purifiers or air cleaners in each classroom be helpful?
The answer is nobody knows. No randomized controlled trials have been done testing the efficacy of air purifiers, but it's not rocket science. On its face, it looks like it should work, right? Because you're essentially driving air through a filter, like a HEPA filter, that should filter out viral particles. As well, moving the air can dilute the density of any virus that's present. So I think it's worth trying. It definitely can't hurt and might help a fair amount.
All right, Raywat Deonandan, Dr. Susy Hota, thank you both for your insights. We always need them.